Our next presenter is Maria Elena Durazo. Maria Elena is the Executive Secretary Treasurer of the Los Angeles County Federation of Labor, AFL, and CIO.
Okay. Thank you very much, Caitlin. I sure learned a lot today. And it's really good that a lot of you are studying this to make some sense out of it. And we need to figure out how to take this out more broadly in bigger audiences throughout the country. I was born and raised in California's Central Valley. And I wasn't supposed to get to the point of setting foot on a university campus like this. I grew up as one of 11 kids in a migrant farm worker family. And we worked in the fields in the 50s and the 60s before Cesar Chavez and the farm worker movement brought us any hope of making change in those working conditions. But some things are forever in my mind. A baby brother who died from a very simple illness that was easily treatable if we had been able to afford a doctor on time. And a baby brother who was only given the dignity of a proper burial because the local church, where we were complete strangers, took up a collection to be able to give him the proper burial. My older sisters constantly battling sexual advances from foremen and labor contractors. Those were the days before toilets in the fields, before clean drinking water, before allegedly state-guaranteed lunch and work breaks. The crop dusters flew low to spray pesticides on the fields right before we entered, or they sprayed in adjacent fields, pretty much saying to us, don't worry about it, that's over here and you're here, as if they couldn't the pesticides couldn't cross over. We worked day to day to buy food, and it usually wasn't enough. My older sisters, who were good students, had to drop out of school to support our family. But there were two things that changed my life. It was Cesar Chavez and the farm workers movement, because that gave us hope. But it were also the social teachings of the Catholic Church, revealed to me as a young girl in our parish in West Fresno, California. And it was the teachings that promoted human dignity through the just distribution of wealth and through the rights of workers to organize. And our Republican brethren often forget about that part of Catholic doctrine, that part that embraces the flourishing of the human spirit, plus the daily struggle to help the most vulnerable human beings flourish. That part that affirms Pope Francis's words that poverty in the world is a scandal. The radical right too often acts as if it has cornered the market when it comes to respect for family and work. But part of respecting families is respecting what it takes to raise a family. Part of respecting work is ensuring that those who work hard for a living enjoy the fruits of their labor through decent pay and benefits and the sacred rights of workers enshrined in papal encyclical and Catholic doctrine. To band together and demand a just share of what they themselves produce. I grew up in this Catholic tradition of a loving God, a passion for the least among us, and a faith deeply rooted in commitment to social justice. My parents, as poor as we were, always felt that we had more than others and sought them out and did work on the one day off from work, which was on a Sunday, to do more for others. It wasn't a day off, it was a day to serve. That Catholic tradition's embrace of community empowerment and shared sacrifice for the common good flies in the face of the narrow and what I believe selfish individualism of libertarianism that has come to dominate the Republican Party. What does it tell you when House GOP leaders such as Paul Ryan are inspired by the philosophy of Ayn Rand. The challenge for all of us is how to exercise our faith in the real world. Almost my entire life has been spent either as a worker or in the labor movement. The lessons I learned growing up, came with me when I organized in the Hotel and Restaurant Workers Union in Los Angeles. Now I try to apply that as a leader of the labor movement, representing 300 unions throughout Los Angeles. Like Cesar Chavez and other progressive labor activists, the Catholic tradition informs my interpretation of self-organization and collective bargaining. One of the great joys of my life has been seeing humble, hard-working men and women turn, through self-organization, into fearless champions for their families, into active participants in the civil and political affairs of their country and community. We in labor in Los Angeles taught housekeepers and janitors and dishwashers, and now port truckers and sanitation workers, car wash workers, to courageously stand up for their rights. We have taught mostly immigrant workers to nonviolently march and picket, and yes, sometimes get arrested, the way Dolores Huerta and Cesar Chavez taught me and a whole generation of young people. Progressive trade unionism is transformational. Ramon Mendez is a roofer in Los Angeles and undocumented. His employer exploited Ramon and his co-workers using their immigration status, demanding work without pay, practicing a complete disregard for job site safety. Ramon's face was splashed with boiling tar. Rejecting his request for medical care, Ramon's supervisor mocked his injury, calling him a crybaby, saying he looked like a Dalmatian because of the tar spots on his face. Ramon knew the risks when he filed a complaint against his employer for these violations. A week after his hearing, just 7 days after his hearing on the complaint, ICE agents showed up at Ramon's house. Instead of hunting down an employer who violated its workers' most basic human rights, the government hunted down the worker. Luckily, Ramon and his wife were not at home. LA unions helped Ramon. We supplied food and emergency aid and applied for him to get a U visa for immigrants who are victims of crime, so Ramon and his family could stay in this country with his family where he belongs. The courage Ramon discovered within himself transformed him. It also transformed the workers around him, so they too are now learning to stand up to their employers' abuses. LA Labor's embrace of Ramon reflects a modern-day application of the social unionism of early 20th century America. Then, many workers who were also recent immigrants, the Polish, the Italians, the Russian Jews, who didn't speak the language, who suffered ethnic and religious discrimination, and who knew little about American civic and political affairs. Back then, unions ran co-op housing, community banks, classes in English and civics. Cesar Chavez modeled his union after that early social unionism. He was not satisfied with creating a business union only focused on wages and hours and conditions. He knew it would take more than a union to overcome the crippling injustices that farm workers faced, both in the workplace and in the community. It would take a movement. So years before Cesar thought there would be union contracts, the Farm Workers Union organized people by providing them with community services. His vision was of a universal movement of farm workers, of other poor Latino workers, of other poor people enduring oppression. Perhaps that is partly why he opposed the Vietnam War in the 60s and supported gay rights in the 70s. Critics still condemn Cesar for his vision that can be described by the Latin word communitas, the spirit of community. Isn't that what a union is, a community of people? That vision inspires progressive activists in the labor movement. That's why we, in Los Angeles, lead the labor movement, standing up for immigrant rights, in aiding local unions that fight to hold on or extend the right to middle-class wages, an affordable health care plan, a decent pension. Imagine that, a decent pension to retire on, and the right to speak up when confronted with abuses. In forging diverse coalitions with outside groups, like, imagine, environmentalists with Teamster port truck drivers, or hotel workers with hundreds of small businesses fighting for an increase in the minimum wage for hotel workers. And in realizing that these campaigns can't just be about workers' jobs, they must also be about improving the communities in which those workers live. We are broadening our own perceptions. We cannot be limited by how things have always been done. We can create a new vision of what a labor movement can do to make ourselves more efficient and relevant. And if we fail to act, our labor movement will become a dinosaur. LA is now one of the low-wage capitals of America. In a recent study, we found that within the boundaries of the city of Los Angeles, 46% of working people earn less than $15 an hour. 46% earn poverty wages. 810,000 people earn poverty wages. If we fail to act, if we fail to organize, if we fail to make change, who's going to speak up for the middle class? If we fail to act, there will be no middle class. The labor movement is the only hope for those who enjoy a middle class status of living and for those who aspire to it. As one who has been raised in this movement, and which I love so much, we cannot stand by and watch that hope slowly become extinguished. For activists such as Cesar Chavez and housekeepers and sanitation workers and farm workers, the Catholic social teachings are a light, leading the way to a new vision that labor and others must embrace. May those Catholic teachings also guide us away from libertarianism and towards a recommitment to community and commonweal that represents our country's best hope of salvation. Thank you.